when Sergeant Thomas Calloway from rural Kansas suggested drilling a hole in a French grain silo for sniper operations. His commanding officers laughed him out of the briefing room. They called it reckless, impractical, a farm boy's fantasy that would compromise their position and get men killed. But on a freezing December morning in 1944, when 14 German soldiers fell in 10 blood-soaked minutes, those same officers stopped laughing. What they didn't know was that Calloway's crazy idea would rewrite tactical doctrine. December 3rd, 1944. 05:47 hours. The village of Saint-Rémy-sur-Loire sat frozen under a pewter sky, its cobblestone streets slick with ice that crunched beneath American boots. Sergeant Thomas Calloway stood in the shadow of a massive grain silo, its cylindrical concrete form rising 60 feet above the shattered remains of a French farming cooperative. The temperature hovered at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. His breath came in visible clouds. Around him, the sounds of war had become routine. Distant artillery thunder, the metallic click of rifles being cleaned, the low murmur of exhausted soldiers trying to stay warm in foxholes that never seemed deep enough. Calloway was 24 years old, born and raised in Emporia, Kansas, where his family had operated a wheat farm for 3 generations. He'd grown up around grain silos, understanding their construction, their blind spots, their strategic potential in ways that West Point graduates never would. His hands, calloused from years of farm work before the army, traced the rough concrete surface as his mind calculated angles, sight lines, and defensive possibilities that no military manual had ever considered. The strategic situation was desperate. The village sat at a critical crossroads where 2 supply routes converged, routes that American forces desperately needed to maintain momentum after the brutal push through Normandy. German forces, reorganizing after catastrophic losses, had established sniper positions in buildings across the surrounding countryside. In the past 72 hours, 17 American soldiers had been killed by German sharpshooters who operated with methodical precision. The pattern was undeniable. Soldiers fell while crossing intersections, while moving supplies, while simply trying to stay alive in a war that had already consumed too many lives. Every conventional response had failed. American counter-snipers deployed to rooftops were systematically eliminated by German marksmen who operated from superior positions with better equipment and years of Eastern Front experience. Smoke screens provided temporary relief, but consumed resources faster than supply lines could replenish. Artillery strikes against suspected sniper positions proved ineffective because German shooters relocated constantly, ghosts in the winter landscape. The mathematics of death had become unbearable. 1 American killed every 4 hours, a casualty rate that would bleed the company dry within a week. Captain Robert Morrison, a career officer from Virginia with 3 years of combat experience, sat behind a makeshift desk in what had been the mayor's office. His face showed the deep lines of a man who'd signed too many condolence letters. Calloway stood before him, cap in hand, proposing what Morrison would later describe as the most insane tactical suggestion he'd heard in 3 years of war. "Sir, that grain silo provides unobstructed sight lines across every approach to the village," Calloway explained, his Kansas accent thick with determination. "I can drill a firing port at the 40-foot level. The concrete is 18 inches thick. German return fire won't penetrate. I'll have 360-degree coverage and elevation advantage over every position they've established." Morrison's response was immediate and unequivocal. "Denied. You want to turn a civilian structure into a military target? The second you fire from that silo, German artillery will reduce it to rubble. You'll be trapped 60 feet in the air with no escape route. It's a suicide position, and I won't authorize it." Calloway persisted with the stubborn pragmatism characteristic of American farmers who'd survived the Dust Bowl. "Sir, the Germans are already targeting everything. That silo has been standing through weeks of bombardment. If I can eliminate even 3 or 4 of their snipers, it changes the equation. Our boys can move without dying. The answer is no, Sergeant. That's final. Dismissed. But Calloway couldn't dismiss the mathematics of death. That afternoon, Private Eddie Kowalski from Detroit died crossing the main intersection, a German bullet through his chest before he could even scream. He was 19 years old. He'd been writing a letter to his mother when the order came to move supplies. The letter was still in his pocket when they carried his body back. That night, Calloway sat in his foxhole with Corporal James Wilson, a coal miner's son from West Virginia who'd become his closest friend in the company. "Jimmy, I can't watch another kid die because we're too scared to try something different," Calloway said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every day we wait is another name on a telegram some mother's gonna receive." Wilson understood. He'd lost his younger brother at Omaha Beach. "What do you need?" "A drill, ropes, someone to watch my back while I work." "You're going to do this without authorization." "I'm going to do this because Morrison won't have to write another letter to Eddie's mom if I do." At 0200 hours, under moonless darkness, Calloway and Wilson approached the grain silo. They carried a hand-cranked masonry drill, borrowed from a French civilian, 200 feet of rope, and the desperate determination of men who'd watched too many friends die. The interior of the silo was pitch black, the air thick with the ghost smell of wheat that had been harvested years before the war consumed everything. Their footsteps echoed against concrete as they climbed the internal ladder, each rung a commitment to a plan that could get them court-martialed if they survived. At 40 feet, Calloway began drilling. The hand crank turned slowly, agonizingly, as the bit chewed through concrete designed to withstand decades of grain pressure. His shoulders burned, his hands blistered. Wilson kept watch below, knowing that any German patrol spotting them would mean death. The drill bit advanced inch by painful inch through concrete that seemed determined to resist. 2 hours of continuous work produced a hole 6 inches deep. 6 more hours would be needed to punch through completely. Dawn approached. They descended, hiding the drill, knowing they'd have to return the next night, and the night after that. However many nights it took, because the alternative was watching more Americans die while doing nothing, and that was something Thomas Calloway's Kansas farm boy conscience simply couldn't accept. December 4th through December 7th, 1944. The drilling continued with exhausting persistence that reflected American industrial determination translated into individual action. Each night, Calloway and Wilson returned to the silo under darkness, taking turns operating the hand-crank drill while the other maintained security. The physical demands were brutal. Calloway's hands developed deep blisters that burst and reformed as calluses. His shoulder muscles screamed from the repetitive motion of cranking against resistant concrete. Wilson's role as lookout meant standing motionless for hours in freezing temperatures, scanning darkness for German patrols while his friend worked 40 feet above. The technical challenges multiplied geometrically. The concrete proved harder than anticipated, embedded with steel reinforcement bars that required careful navigation. The drill bit dulled after the first night, necessitating sharpening against fieldstones that left the cutting edge irregular and less efficient. They worked in complete silence, unable to risk even whispered conversation that might carry across the frozen landscape to German listening posts. The only sounds were the grinding scrape of metal against concrete and Calloway's controlled breathing as he fought exhaustion that made his vision blur. Environmental conditions made everything worse. Temperatures dropped to 22 degrees at night. Ice formed on the interior ladder rungs, making each climb treacherous. Calloway's breath froze in his mustache. His fingers went numb despite gloves, forcing him to stop every 30 minutes to restore circulation by pressing his hands against his body heat. The darkness was absolute, forcing them to work by touch alone because flashlights would announce their position to any observer within 2 miles. The psychological strain was equally severe. Every night meant risking court-martial charges for unauthorized modification of civilian infrastructure. Every night meant potential discovery by German patrols that had already killed 3 American sentries in similar night operations. Every night meant Morrison might discover their disobedience and confine them to quarters or worse. But every day brought more casualties. On December 5th, Sergeant Frank Martinez from New Mexico died. December 6th, Private Timothy O'Brien from Boston took a bullet through the throat. The mathematics remained unbearable. Wilson, who'd initially helped because of friendship, became increasingly invested in the mission's success. "My brother died because we didn't have enough landing craft at Omaha," he told Calloway during a brief rest on the 4th night. "Command said they couldn't spare more resources, but you know what? They found resources when generals needed them. You're doing what they won't. You're finding a solution when the system says there isn't one." The whole progressed with agonizing slowness. 6 inches the first night, 5 more the second, 8 on the third. By the 4th night, December 7th, exactly 3 years after Pearl Harbor, they were 16 inches deep in 18-inch concrete. Close enough that Calloway could see dawn light filtering through the remaining barrier. One more night, just one more night of drilling, and they'd break through. But on the afternoon of December 7th, their operation nearly collapsed. Captain Morrison conducted a surprise inspection of equipment, searching for missing tools after reports that French civilians were complaining about stolen property. Wilson had hidden the drill in their foxhole beneath blankets and ration crates. Morrison came within 6 feet of discovering it. "Sergeant Wilson, this area is a disaster. Clean it up, or I'll have you both on latrine duty for a month." "Yes, sir." "Immediately, sir." That night they finished. At 0347 hours on December 8th, the drill bit punched through the final 2 inches of concrete. Cold air rushed through the opening, a sensation of liberation that made Calloway laugh despite his exhaustion. They'd done it. They'd created a firing port that violated every regulation and defied every order. But they'd done it. The hole was 8 inches in diameter, positioned at precisely 42 feet elevation, angled slightly downward to provide optimal sight lines across the village approaches. Calloway spent the remaining darkness hours preparing the position. He secured rope for rapid descent in case of emergency. He positioned water canteens and ration tins. He calculated range cards for every visible intersection and approach route. He test-fired his M1903 Springfield rifle, the same weapon his father had carried in World War I, confirming 0 at 300 yards. At dawn on December 8th, he didn't request permission. He simply took his position, climbing the internal ladder with rifle slung across his back, settling into the firing position he'd prepared, pressing his eye to the scope and waiting for German snipers to reveal themselves through the fatal mistake of operating against an opponent who'd changed the rules of engagement. The wait lasted 40 minutes. Then, at 0623 hours, movement. A German sniper in a barn loft 600 yards southeast, shifting position to target American soldiers preparing breakfast. Calloway controlled his breathing, calculated windage for the 8-mile-per-hour breeze, adjusted elevation for the 600-yard distance, squeezed the trigger with practiced smoothness. The German never knew what killed him. One moment he was sighting through his scope. The next, he simply ceased to exist as Calloway's bullet struck with devastating precision. The distinctive crack of the Springfield echoed across the frozen landscape. Every American soldier in the village looked up, searching for the shot's source. Captain Morrison burst from his headquarters, scanning rooftops for the sniper position that had just saved American lives from a position no one had authorized. December 8th, 1944. 0625 hours. The Germans responded with systematic precision that demonstrated their Eastern Front experience. Within 90 seconds of Calloway's first shot, return fire erupted from 3 separate positions. German snipers had triangulated his firing port through muzzle flash and sound, executing textbook counter-sniper doctrine developed through years of brutal warfare in Russia. Rifle bullets slammed into the concrete around the 8-inch opening with sharp cracks that sent concrete chips spraying inward. But the 18-inch concrete walls that American military doctrine had dismissed as insufficient proved impenetrable. German 7. A 92mm Mauser rounds, lethal at penetrating wooden structures and brick walls, simply shattered against reinforced concrete designed to hold millions of pounds of grain. Each impact created a small crater, but no penetration. Calloway remained completely protected, methodically identifying German firing positions by their muzzle flashes, calculating ranges, and returning fire with mechanical efficiency. The German snipers found themselves confronting an impossible tactical situation. Standard counter-sniper doctrine required either flanking the position or suppressing it with superior firepower. But flanking was impossible because the silo's elevation provided Calloway with observation across every approach route. Suppression was impossible because their rifles couldn't penetrate his protection. And unlike traditional sniper positions in buildings or trees that could be destroyed with artillery, the silo's massive concrete structure would require sustained bombardment that the Germans couldn't authorize without revealing their own positions to American artillery observers. At 06:28 hours, a German sniper in a church steeple attempted to relocate to better cover. Calloway tracked his movement through the scope with practiced ease. The German made it 3 steps before the Springfield's distinctive crack announced his death. The body tumbled from the steeple, a sight that sent shockwaves through German positions across the village perimeter. German field commanders, monitoring the engagement through field glasses, struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Their intelligence reports had described American forces as demoralized, poorly led, and tactically inflexible. The presence of a sniper position in a grain silo, a civilian agricultural structure, violated every assumption about American operational limitations. German military doctrine, refined through rigid Prussian tradition, emphasized hierarchical approval for tactical innovation. The idea that an individual American sergeant would independently modify civilian infrastructure without authorization was literally incomprehensible within their operational framework. At 06:31 hours, German tactical doctrine compounded their losses through inflexibility. Following established protocol for counter-sniper operations, a German team attempted to establish a new firing position in a warehouse 650 yards to the northeast. Calloway observed their movement as they crossed an open courtyard, their grey-white winter camouflage visible against darker stone. He fired 3 shots in rapid succession. 3 Germans fell. The surviving team members abandoned their equipment and fled, eliminating one entire sniper team from the tactical equation. By 06:35 hours, the German operational situation had deteriorated catastrophically. 7 confirmed sniper kills had eliminated nearly half their operational marksmen covering the village sector. The survivors faced a crisis of confidence. Their weapons couldn't reach Calloway. Their positions were systematically being identified and eliminated. Retreat would expose them to his fire. Remaining in position meant eventual death. At 06:38 hours, desperation produced a coordinated assault. 4 remaining German snipers opened simultaneous fire on Calloway's position from 4 directions, hoping to overwhelm him with volume. The concrete around his firing port exploded under concentrated rifle fire, creating a storm of concrete fragments and dust that filled the interior. But the 8-inch opening limited German targeting solutions. Most rounds struck solid concrete. The few that passed through the opening missed Calloway by feet as he shifted position within his protected space. His response demonstrated the tactical advantage of protected elevation. Moving methodically from target to target, he engaged each German position with aimed fire while remaining essentially invulnerable to return shots. The Germans couldn't relocate because movement meant exposure. They couldn't maintain position because Calloway knew their locations. The tactical equation had become simple mathematics. They would lose. At 6:42 hours, Calloway eliminated the 11th German sniper, a shooter positioned in a farmhouse cellar window who'd believed his ground-level position provided adequate concealment. Calloway's downward angle eliminated that protection. At 6:45 hours, numbers 12 and 13 fell in quick succession as they attempted coordinated movement to a fallback position. The 14th kill came at 6:47 hours. A German sniper, possibly a team leader, made a final desperate attempt to relocate under covering fire from machine gun positions. Calloway tracked his sprint across open ground, led the target by appropriate distance, and fired. The German fell mid-stride, tumbling into a drainage ditch where his body would remain until American patrols secured the area 3 hours later. At 6:48 hours, silence. Complete, absolute silence across the engagement zone. 10 minutes and 14 confirmed kills. The German sniper threat that had dominated tactical operations for 72 hours had been systematically eliminated by a Kansas farm boy operating from a position his own commanders had forbidden him to create. American soldiers emerged cautiously from covered positions, scanning rooftops for threats that no longer existed. Captain Morrison stood in the village square, field glasses trained on the grain silo, watching Calloway's silhouette visible through the 8-inch firing port. His expression cycled through shock, fury at the unauthorized operation, and reluctant recognition that the sergeant had just accomplished what the entire chain of command had failed to achieve. Morrison reached for his radio handset to report the engagement to battalion headquarters, knowing his report would change tactical doctrine, but unsure whether it would result in a medal recommendation or a court-martial. The truth was probably both. December 8, 1944, through May 1945. When Captain Morrison's after-action report reached battalion headquarters, it triggered a bureaucratic earthquake that rippled through command structures with unprecedented velocity. The report documented 14 confirmed enemy kills in 10 minutes from a position that had been explicitly prohibited, achieved by enlisted personnel who'd operated without authorization, but saved an estimated 40 American lives by eliminating the sniper threat that had paralyzed tactical operations. Colonel James Patterson, battalion commander and career Army officer from West Point, faced an impossible decision. Standard military procedure demanded court-martial for unauthorized modification of civilian infrastructure and direct disobedience of orders, but the operational results were undeniable. Calloway's grain silo sniper hole had accomplished what conventional tactics couldn't. More critically, word of the engagement had spread through enlisted ranks with wildfire intensity. Soldiers were calling Calloway a hero. Attempting to court-martial him would devastate morale across units that had already endured too much loss. Patterson's solution reflected pragmatic American adaptability. On December 12th, Sergeant Thomas Calloway received an official reprimand for unauthorized operation, entered into his permanent record. Simultaneously, he received a Bronze Star for valor, commendation for tactical innovation, and promotion to staff sergeant, with assignment to battalion intelligence for sniper operations. The message was clear. Initiative was valued, but chain of command still mattered. It was a uniquely American compromise that acknowledged both military discipline and individual innovation. The operational impact transcended individual recognition. Within 2 weeks, tactical manuals at division headquarters incorporated elevated defensive positions utilizing existing civilian infrastructure as authorized sniper doctrine. Engineering units received orders to identify and prepare similar positions in other villages. The Calloway method, though never officially named, spread through American forces across the European theater. Grain silos, water towers, church steeples, and industrial smokestacks became preferred sniper positions. By February 1945, 17 similar positions had been established across the Western Front. The tactical implications were profound. German forces, already struggling with material shortages and manpower losses, found their sniper operations increasingly ineffective against American positions they couldn't suppress without revealing their own locations. The psychological impact was equally significant. German soldiers began reporting that American snipers were impossible to counter, a morale problem that intelligence officers noted in captured documents. One German after-action report from January 1945 stated, "American sniper operations demonstrate flexibility and initiative that violates all predictable doctrine. Traditional countermeasures prove ineffective." For Calloway personally, the fame brought unexpected burdens. He was pulled from frontline operations for training assignments, teaching other snipers the techniques he'd developed. He hated it. "I'm not a teacher, sir. I'm a soldier," he told Patterson repeatedly. But his expertise was too valuable. He trained 43 snipers between December 1944 and March 1945, each of whom carried forward the lessons learned from a Kansas farm boy who understood that sometimes unconventional solutions saved lives when conventional wisdom failed. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. Calloway was in Germany when the announcement came, training a new sniper team despite the obvious reality that fighting was concluding. When the celebration erupted, he sat alone in a bombed-out building, thinking about Private Kowalski and Sergeant Martinez, and all the soldiers who died before his 8-inch hole in a concrete wall had changed the tactical equation. Victory felt incomplete when so many hadn't survived to witness it. He returned to Kansas in August 1945, received a hero's welcome in Emporia, shook hands with the mayor, and immediately returned to his family's wheat farm. He never spoke publicly about the war. When local newspaper reporters asked for interviews, he declined. When veterans groups invited him to speak, he refused. His response was always the same: "I just did what needed doing. Nothing special about that." But the military recognized what Calloway couldn't see in himself. In 1947, Army historians conducting post-war analysis identified the grain silo engagement as one of 12 tactical innovations that significantly altered operational doctrine. The analysis credited Calloway with demonstrating that individual initiative and creative problem-solving were as valuable as traditional military hierarchy. The lesson was incorporated into training programs at Fort Benning, though Calloway's name was eventually lost to institutional memory. The physical structure that had changed history stood until 1953, when the French farming cooperative demolished it during post-war reconstruction. No one thought to place a historical marker. The villagers of Saint-Rémy-sur-Loire remembered it vaguely as the American Sniper Tower, but specific details faded as survivors aged. The story might have disappeared entirely except for one persistent detail. Corporal Wilson, who'd helped drill that 8-inch hole, became a history teacher after the war. He told the story to his students in West Virginia every year, ensuring that at least one generation remembered what happened when a farm boy from Kansas decided that regulations mattered less than lives. Thomas Calloway died in 1987 at age 67, having spent 42 quiet years farming wheat in Kansas. His obituary mentioned his military service in a single line, but at his funeral, 7 men attended who'd never met him before that day. They were snipers or sons of snipers, who'd learned his techniques, traveled across the country because they'd heard a man named Calloway had passed, and wanted to pay respects to someone who'd changed how their profession understood innovation, courage, and the American principle that sometimes the best way forward requires breaking the rules that hold everyone back. The heroes who changed history aren't always the ones commanding armies from headquarters maps. Sometimes they're farm boys from Kansas who understand that concrete walls and creative thinking can save lives when conventional wisdom fails. If this story reminded you that courage and innovation matter more than rank or regulation, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. What other untold stories from World War II deserve to be remembered? Let's keep these heroes' legacies alive together. Thanks for watching, and never forget what ordinary Americans accomplished when the world needed them most.